Have you ever wondered whether the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment and acted from that place?
Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your hosts Brian Berneman and Kayla Greenville, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world.
We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers.
From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host, and for this episode, I have the pleasure to be joined by Karishma Singh Kelsey here in Auckland, but as well in the computer. Thank you so much, Karishma, for taking the time to be here with me on this episode. And I think that this is a really special episode, and I wanted to have you as a guest because at this moment, as we are recording, it is Fashion Revolution Week. And this is such an important topic that I have been learning for the past few years. You have been on this for many more. But I wanted to start with trying to get to know Karishma before we start to get into the fashion revolution topics. Who is Karishma?
Oh, so firstly, Brian, I want to say thank you so much for having me on Conscious Action Podcast. I've been a fan of the movement and the work that you and the other co-founder have been doing for several years. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for making conscious awareness accessible to people. So who's Karishma? I guess, well, this is going to be a long story, but I'm going to have to start right at my roots. And so I am, as Brian has mentioned, I'm currently in Auckland, but I am a South African and that grew up in rural South Africa during the time of the apartheid era. And the reason I have to mention a little bit about that is because having grown up in a country that had such an incredible political stance is actually an integral part of what has formed me, together with the fact that I had a foundation and a family that was built in community, that was built in philanthropic practice, and that was built in innately caring for the earth in all actions that we did. So a very typical example would be, so my grandparents were farmers, and my grandfather was a sugarcane farmer. And they were immigrants to South Africa at the time for 2 generations for most of my family and 3 generations for some of them. And my grandfather was a self-made man and really was built and cared for by the community. So an integral part of life was, how does he then reciprocate that and create the I am because we are philosophy, which is very much what we were all about. And growing up in South Africa was about, despite our political aspect of what was happening. And so in this vein, my grandfather pushed for community development practices. And a typical example would be that in our garden, we would plant trees, we had beautiful flowers, and he would always, every act of planting was conscious. So every tree that they planted or fruit that they planted had multiple purposes. And he'd always say to us, and my grandmother would always say to us, you plant something that it must take care of the earth first. It must nourish, it must be nutrient rich and helping the earth regenerate. So before these were buzzwords, regeneration, permaculture, we were kind of innately living in this concept. And he'd be like, the tree then needs to flourish and then be a home for as many animals as it can be. And then an extra bonus is that we as humans would then be able to get some fruit from that tree and also get shade to rest. And then if you can live your life in that totality, then you are definitely being the best possible humans. This was life. And so coming back to the political aspect then, having been brought up in this environment, my aunts, my uncles were all educators because that was what was needed to put change into the world. My grandfather ran lots of workshops, trained and got all his workers to read and write in the sugarcane fields while they were working. So it was almost natural for me that the progression of this legacy would be that how do we take the benefit of education, the benefit of the love and the support of the community, and how do we sort of expand that and create that into a bigger realm of possibility. And growing up in an environment of so much of wisdom, I always felt as a little child that, yes, my friends may not have had shoes, may not have gone to school because they were Black, but they taught me how to make toys. They taught me how to, how to wire and how to actually make my first pairs of earrings and things. All came from skills that they did. And then I went to school and I studied. So when we'd come home, I teach them what I learned and they teach me what they learned. So for me, we were not different. So whilst apartheid separated us, I just kind of felt like, oh my God, the world is so full of wisdom. And as I got older and older and older and realized the inequities of South Africa and the context of brown, Black South Africa, I always thought that what would it be like if I could take this wisdom and spread it into the world and share this wisdom? Because after all, I am because we are. And that was fundamentally ingrained in me. So Karishma Singh Kelsey is a person who innately feels spiritual connection to the earth, to its people, and to all the wisdoms. It's just part of who I am.
Beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that it's so important, that we can see and recognize and acknowledge where we come from, and how we are connected with each other, and how can we bring our gifts and what we can offer to the collective. And I think that that's something that, since I've known you, that I know this is part of your purpose, how you live your life, and how we are trying to create a more conscious and connected world that actually cares for everyone, us, others, the planet, all. And I'm interested into knowing a little bit more of the journey. How did you start to get interested with some of the skills into actually being a designer? How did that happen?
Oh, okay. Well, that also starts from childhood. So I think I was completely, and I think for as long as I can remember, I've been playing dress up and I've been playing educator. And I've been, of course, as you know, enamored by making and by creating, which is what we did. So growing up on the farm, my first car was a wire car with wheels that were half cans, like Coca-Cola cans cut in half. And we needed 8 cans to make 4 wheels, and then we'd use because we'd cut the can in half, but then we'd need the end to close it up. And so my friends were actually the people that worked in the farm. Their kids taught me how to make a wire car. So creating was an integral part of how we lived. My grandmother and my grandmothers were avid sewers and recreators, so nothing ever got wasted. So we would, example, in the old days, flour and rice came in huge big sacks in beautiful cotton with like writing on it. And so those flour sacks would then be turned into beautiful bed sheets or into beautiful pieces of work that, for whatever was needed at that time. Pillowcases, bed sheets, bedspreads. I actually even made tiny dolls. So sewing and creating was almost part of living. And so in terms of the fashion aspect of it, I played dress up every day. I imagined whimsical things. And I think I just was this innate stylist. I grew up on a farm with beautiful tropical bush. So the big palm trees were definitely mermaid wings, and the big, big leaves could be parts of clothes. One of my famous childhood designs is a 5 kg orange sack transformed into a beautiful dress. So this is something that I've just always been involved in, to play, to create, and to make has just always been a part of just being a child, not serious, just being a child. And again, being African, growing up in the cultural context where to remake, to reuse was so innate. Of course, we used everything around us to make toys, to make dolls. It was never something serious. It was just frivolous play. Sewing your own clothes was very much a part of growing up as well. Buying new things was something quite rare. You always got hand-me-downs. It was just an innate way of living. And so, I loved the art of dressing up, and I still do. It's still very much a part of me. And so as I got a little bit older and went into my teenage years, getting dressed was such a fun, beautiful experience. I never saw it as following a trend. I always thought of how can I create and make fun, cool things. And so that inspired me to want to learn how to sew and want to learn how to draw. And at the time growing up in South Africa, and at this time, this was the late 80s and the early 90s, the possibility of doing careers like we have today were very, very limited. And so, you were either a teacher or a lawyer or a doctor, or if you wanted to study the arts, you did a Bachelor of Arts and you were really considered frivolous, but it was really all you would do with your life is maybe just teach. And then there were the trades, and that was fashion. And I was just like, oh, that is what I'm going to do, because this was the only way that I could see I would learn more of these skills. So I performed in theater performances to let out my creativity. And I was like, okay, the only thing else I can do is study fashion. And so I would read magazines and anything I could get my hand on. And this whimsical nature of this creativity was what just caught me. And so at 14, I started to become a model, and I modeled, did catwalk modeling, I did photographic modeling. And that just opened the doors for me. It opened the doors into this world which I didn't know had any of the issues we talk about today. I just knew that it was this creative expression. And so I then went on to study design, and then, continued my career where I worked as a commercial designer in South Africa for the prestigious nowadays owner of Country Road and David Jones, at the time, the Will True Group, and where I was actually their first person of color on their leadership design team. And that was where it all changed. That was where I realized the inequities of this arena that I love, because suddenly clothing was not art. Clothing was trend directed. Clothing was about how many units you sold. Clothing was about forcing people to buy something beyond their means. And so that's where it started to change. That was actually the best learning ground for me. But my journey is an innate creative, and then kind of exploring this world to where I'm today.
So beautiful. And I think, as you're saying, it's such an interesting thing to have those eye-opening moments, like as you're saying, because I think that in this space, that is the fashion industry especially, it is so what's the word? I mean, the inequity is huge.
Oh, absolutely.
In terms of what we are fed, but also in terms of, as you say, like, the representation is not there. And it's a big thing as well in terms of, as you're saying, how is the industry driven? It's not driven as a means of expression. It's not driven as a way of art. It's not as a way of connecting. It is about money. It's a business.
It's a business. It's a cutthroat business.
Yes, and you know, I have to say, like, up until 5 years ago, that I discovered the fashion revolution movement, and that I started to run events around it and getting to learn a little bit more, and talking with people like you and some other people here in Auckland and in other places. I had no idea about any of these big issues on the fashion industry, and as well, I didn't know the connection with my clothes for myself mostly.
This is the problem. This is exactly the problem. You hit it nail on the head. This is one of the most inequitable structures and systems, and it's a system that is actually built on suppressing people. So the people who make your clothes are paid absolutely minimally. So whilst, you know, when I was a young child, so when I was 13, 14, or even younger, the area that we had lived in, almost 50% of the people that I knew who had parents or aunts and uncles working as clothing workers, as factory workers making clothing for all of these big chains. And these places were riddled with terrible working conditions. I mean, the first jeanswear factory I went to, which is since then closed, used to be called Barrington Jeans, was disgusting. I could not understand how people actually worked in a space like this. It was, you know, a tiny room or a couple of layers, but we entered into a space that had no air conditioning. There may have been 50 sewing machines in a small space. The toilets were disgusting and reeked of urine. People were surrounded by dust. There wasn't proper ventilation. And this was a product that was then going to an elite, super extravagant retailer. But this were the conditions that the people worked under. And, you know, I've gone and I've worked in several of these places. And what I realized was that this particular jeans company was the better of the companies, because whilst it looked forlorn, at least their workers were paid properly and given proper lunch breaks. I went to a similar factory. And in this factory, girls actually said to me, we don't wear lipstick because, you know, guys think it's an opportunity for them to, you know, it's an invitation to treat them differently, to treat them badly. And bosses very often manhandled the workers, and the workers would not say anything because they were absolutely terrified to actually lose their jobs. And this was, and I have some personal examples in, you know, where now these women are much older and they're grandparents and have now shared stories with me about how difficult it was when we were teenagers and they were parents working in these factories. They would work, you know, between 5 to 6 days a week. During busy periods, they would work for 7 days a week. They never got paid any overtime. And if they said no, there was no such thing as, oh, my son is sick, or my child is sick, and I've got to quickly run to school as we have today, or I've got to quickly go and pick them up and go to the doctor. If you did that, you didn't get paid. You may have lost your job, and that was really difficult for you. I mean, as a fashion designer working in a design studio of the most prestigious retailer, Truworths in Cape Town, in this beautiful, extravagant office, we were not paid overtime. We were paid a tiny, I mean, my salary, and I'm very, you know, happy to share the exact amount, back in the year, in 1998, was an equivalent of 400 New Zealand dollars, about, at the time, 400 US dollars. And I worked on average during the busy periods of time between, you know, 45 was a normal week, but between 52 to 60 hours a week. My son at the time was 3 years old, spent many a night in the fashion studio because I couldn't afford daycare, and I was a young single mom and I couldn't afford these things. So I would take him to his regular daycare, and I couldn't afford a babysitter, so I'd just bring him back to work with me. And when you told people, we were not allowed to be part of the union. So that's the number one. Secondly, when you tried to discuss this with the human resource departments, it was like, well, you know, you really need to figure out the priorities of your life. Perhaps you shouldn't have had a child. That is not an answer. But, you know, and in our contracts, And I still have my contract. In our contracts, we signed that we would work, that working extra hours was a sign of our commitment to our jobs and therefore we would not get paid overtime.
Mm.
And I was 22 years old when I joined this company. And that is not okay. So I figured, if this is what's happening at the design level, what is happening at the factory level?
Mm.
And then kind of, this was the beginning of the made in China turn, and us looking at overseas markets. Up until that point, South Africa had produced most things within South Africa, and we worked a little bit with certain countries in Europe, but because of the economic sanctions that were imposed and lifted just at that time, we were mostly, a country that was self-sufficient.
Mm.
And it was an industry of about a 250,000 to almost 300,000 people.
Mm.
And in its heyday, it was almost 500,000 people. And it didn't matter where you went. Factory workers were telling you the same things. The Woolworths factory, which was the sister company of the company I worked for, was the best company to work for, because unlike where I worked, they were treated well, they were paid better. And I have aunts who have worked in that industry for 45 years in the same factory because they were treated so well. So we did have these differences, but majority of these factories were riddled with these sorts of issues.
It's incredible. This is incredible. And I think that the more that I hear stories, I think that this is so important, because for me, I was completely ignorant of what does it take for me to have this t-shirt. I like in terms of the resources, but the human perspective and the human rights perspective. And as you're saying, there's so many issues in that space. I've seen through the last few years with some of the documentaries like The True Cost or River Blue, or some of the other amazing documentaries that are showing that. And by having conversations with people, the conditions are literally like modern slavery.
It is absolutely modern slavery. I mean, the remake community is advocating this right now, and they have been for a couple of years, and they're really bringing this information to the forefront in a very, very dynamic way. And just in the pandemic, I think the pandemic has really highlighted the height of slavery within this industry. I mean, we have in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in the new clothing hubs of the world, we have millions of garment workers who, I must add, are predominantly women. Mm-hmm. And many of these women have not been paid, have lost their jobs, or they have been forced to go back because they need these jobs, but they haven't actually been paid for a whole year before that. And so there's a lot of these types of stories and these things happening. So with one of the things that was highlighted in the pandemic was that brands canceled orders. So in the industry, in the fashion supply chain, we actually really don't have stringent policy rules. And part of it is because we have such a long supply chain, but another part of it is because we have kind of fully embraced this neoliberal mindset of capitalism and endless growth. And it's just about, it's not in the best interest to actually make and create these rules. So one of the things is that a company, we won't use a name, but say a big brand, can happily order clothing from different manufacturers, which is what happened in Bangladesh and in Sri Lanka and is happening to date. They would order these things, but then in the pandemic, they canceled the orders because they couldn't open their stores. Now, a lot of those clothing and a lot of those orders were already made and were already ready to ship. And suddenly, in fact, it's a total of about $40 billion worth of money that was outstanding. And on money, on work that had already been done, on clothes that's sitting in warehouses, factories that already have done the work. And companies just feeling, the huge brands of today, feeling that it's not their responsibility to pay. And these are brands that in the pandemic have risen by about 11%. So, and let's put into perspective, a garment worker's salary is only about $100 and some odd a week. $100 and some odd a month.
Yeah.
So to pay every garment worker is probably just going to put a tiny dent in the large profits of the ASOSs and the H&Ms of the world. But this is the reality of the fashion industry right now.
Yeah. And it is, and one of the really challenging things I believe in terms of this is that as a systemic issue,
Yes.
these women, as you're saying, rightly, predominantly women, this is their only means of livelihood, yet their livelihood is modern slavery.
Yes.
And one of the things that through trying to think of what can we do as solutions, it's not, the solution is not stopping the fashion industry, because then all of these millions of people won't have any means of making a livelihood at the moment. Yet are the companies, as you're saying, the big companies, are they willing to pay what is actually right to pay their workers, as well as reducing the amount of the new like garments that they are creating?
Yes. So it's as you said, it's a systemic issue. And so the just stopping production will then result in a human issue of people not having work. So it's almost like we need a full vision, a full change of the system. But we have some immediate actions that we can take, and then stagger long-term actions. This is the way we, as fashion researchers and as people that are advocating for systemic change in this industry that I must add, we all deeply love as a creative expression, but we do not want slavery. We do not want exploitation of the earth. We do not want annihilation of our resources and of the animals. We want it to be in harmony with everything. So coming from this vantage point, many of us advocate that we look at how do we slow growth? How do we slow this consumption? And at the same time, how do we empower and uplift all the humans that are at the moment part of the supply chain? But how do we really, if we really want to empower somebody, if we really want to build equity, then it can't be by keeping anybody on a hamster wheel, which is what we have right now. So if we really want to do that, I mean, one of the things that I often think about is in countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, but we'll use Bangladesh as an example because it was Bangladesh and Myanmar, Cambodia were incredibly hit during this pandemic, and we are still fighting. We see what's happening in Myanmar right now, and these are brave women standing up against this oppressiveness of their work environments. So when you look at this, we are advocating that we systemically change how we're working by maybe, if you really want women in this industry, then teach them other skills. So as a government initiative, maybe look at the brands going in and going, okay, well, these people sew, but let's give them training programs. Let's look at entrepreneurship activities. Let's look at the wisdoms that they bring into the world, and what will that look like? Let's look at daycare centers. Let's look at well-being initiatives. So we can start with this, and this would not impact brands drastically. And then on the brand perspective, sadly, I think we really need some drastic governmental policies to shift this, because right now, one of the big campaigns that we have in the world is in the advocacy that polyester or poly blend fabrics, synthetic fabrics, are actually better off for the earth than the natural fibers, because the natural fibers are so resource intensive. And so this is actually a marketing ploy, because this is an industry that's backed and that is part of a mindset of continuous growth. So instead of what we need is real, authentic information that people know the truth. And so when governments are backing industries that are saying that polyester is better, that is actually only half of the truth. Whilst it may be less resource intensive to create, what is it doing to our oceans with microplastics that are being released into the atmosphere? So it seems to me that decision makers, governments, policymakers, industries, business are all looking at what I call Band-Aid effects. They're not looking at the system in total. They're not looking at that every plant, every animal, every essence of this earth is as important as each of us. And so we're not seeing the total picture because we're trying to fix something at the expense of something else.
Yes, and as you're saying, that holistic view, I think that this is something as we're trying to create change, that is the viewpoint that we need to maintain.
Exactly.
Because it's as you're saying, I think that it's so important to realize that, like, yes, this certain material, polyester, like it's actually in a sense better, yet better in terms of what? Better in terms of yes, as you're saying, as a bandage for the problem that we're having now, because of the throwaway culture that we have, because of the not paying enough of all of the different issues that we have. And I don't want to get too much into all of the issues, because I do want to get into some of the ways that we can start to create this change. And for the ones that do want to see all of the issues, especially, go to the Fashion Revolution website, start checking some of that information, go and check the True Cost documentary, go and check River Blue documentary, listen to some other podcasts with amazing, especially women that are creating this change. But I do want to focus, Karishma, and I think that you are part of this, is creating a shift in consciousness and creating a shift in how we relate to what we wear, how we relate to the clothing that we already have. Can you share a little bit more about that and about what you're doing with Miraculous Me?
Okay. So for me, you're right. For us to be holistic, I mean, the biggest issue I find with the whole climate change catastrophe that we're in, be it fashion, be it food, be it the beauty sick culture, of everyone, wanting to be, living forever, and all of these aspects that we have in our modern sort of neoliberal society, stems from one thing, and that's, as you mentioned, it's the disconnection that we are bigger than our lives and our bodies in this lifetime, and that we are somehow, not, some things, if they don't benefit humans in the now, are not so important to life. Therefore, we can get rid of it. And that all of that comes from just a simple sense of disconnection, that I am part of this earth. The earth is a part of me. I am part of the water, and the water is a part of me. And so with the Miraculous Me movement, we are actually focusing on that. How do you reconnect to self? How do you, through this noise, through living in whichever life capacity you live, how do we come back into our spiritual sense of who we authentically are? And so we are advocating, because the issue that we've spent our lives working with revolves around clothing and revolves around fashion, I kind of pondered upon this idea of how do we take this evil concept of clothing and how do we transform this into a positive? Because like everything, I think that if we constantly shame and blame, that's sort of pushing more negativity. So how do we transform that negativity into a positive action? And that thinking then, which is very much a Buddhist Tibetan philosophy and very much a philosophy of oneness with the earth, led me down this idea of how is it? And it took me down the process of how is it that we create, and what happens how do you build consciousness? And so when we looked at how we build conscious awareness, I looked at myself as a creative, and my whole life's journey, I create. And when I create, I'm in a space of oneness. I'm in a space of connection to self. And when I'm in a space of connection, it's quiet. I feel limitless. I hear. And you hear through this. Maybe for some people it's a feeling of, I would love to start eating more green vegetables and less meat, or I would love to experiment with this green dress. I'm going to try to make it. So you build an awareness. Something changes within yourself that impacts you in different areas. So coming into the side of clothing, I kind of looked at, okay, well, when I started doing creative therapy sessions with different people as a healer, people would say to me, well, I can't draw, so this is not going to work. And that got me to think of, okay, what is the action that we do every day that is actually a creative action? So that's eating. And cooking is a creative action. It can be. And the other thing is getting dressed. And the issue being clothing, where we are consuming too much, where we are propelled, this industry of fashion and beauty is fueled by, I am not enough. I am feeling unworthy. And therefore, I need to constantly consume. And then the more you consume, the less worthy you actually feel. And it's a vicious cycle. And so wanting to stop that and understanding that comes from a disconnection to spirit, to self, and our connection of self to the earth. I kind of went, well, how about if we take clothing and make getting dressed a complete creativity? What happens? And so we've been experimenting with that for quite a few years. With the Karishma Design clients, we've been experimenting with this unintentionally since 2003. With myself, I've been doing this my whole life. And I can tell you what has happened, because for me, what happens is when I stand in front of my wardrobe as an artist stands in front of an empty canvas with their paints and their tools, and I look at this as, okay, I'm going to create something. I'm going to use my body as this canvas, and I'm going to create something. And if I am willing to be open, which is my intuition guiding me, which is actually, some of us would call that the spirit, the soul guiding you. It's your connection to self. And if you stand in front of your wardrobe and you just pick randomly the things you want to wear and you put it together, it doesn't matter. In that moment of putting things together, you quiet. In the process, at different times, you will hear voices going, which is your mind and the ego going, oh, you can't wear that, or somebody would say that, or, oh my God, you way too old to wear that. You get all these voices coming into your head, like saying, oh, you can't wear skinny jeans because you are not a size 8 or something like that. But if you keep continuing to play and to show up, you find that it's a creative action. And whatever you put together, it doesn't matter how old it is or how outdated it is. It doesn't matter. Whatever you put together, actually for that day will give you a skip in your step. It gives you some kind of thing that happens. And it's the same as a creative, as an artist, not as a designer, but as an artist. That's the same high. It's almost the creative high that we get. It's also what I call the meditation high or the yoga high. It's that same feeling, but the pathway was through just being creative in that moment with your clothing. So the Miraculous Me movement then took that a little bit further. And we looked at other aspects of spiritual healing that is rooted in the Eastern arts of healing. And we've researched it to see connections with other healers and other wisdoms of the world. And that was the power of color. So, the Western terminology of color therapy is called chromotherapy, but each of our wisdoms in Ayurveda, we also governed by color. And in the ancient African wisdoms and in the ancient American wisdoms, they are definitely governed by color. And so we researched all of these and came up with the connection that our chakras, our energy centers, the earth's energy centers, and the world in and of itself is operating on different frequencies, and that's the frequency of color. And how does that impact us? What is the language of color? So we go into educating people on the language of color and how the color, example, if you're needing red, and if you're just feeling completely drawn to this red color. Now, marketers may have told you, Brian, that you are too light-skinned and therefore you cannot wear red. It's going to wash you out or something. But still, you feel completely drawn to it. Now, there's one of three things that's happening there, is what we have come to feel and come to intuitively realize is one, that you're either needing that color, the energy of that color and the meaning that what that color represents in terms of its actual wave frequency. So you're needing that in your spirit, in your body to either heal you, or you're needing it because you're in resonance with it. So you're not really needing it, you're actually in its resonance. So you're almost kind of playfully engaging with it. And if it is that you need that color, then some part of you is wanting you to embrace it in your life, through your food, through your clothing. And if you embrace it, you will then find the third step, which is the healing that will happen, something that gets triggered from it. So we've kind of delved and dug into how we would equip you through that movement. And the whole aim, which then takes us to the last bit, is the intuition. And the intuition for somebody who practices in a spiritual space, the intuition is what I call the voice of the spirit, or the voice of the bigger force talking to you. It's your connection to the bigger ether of all the voices. It's our universe connecting through us. It's channeling through us.
Yeah.
And so we go through activities and work on how to build that, and how all of this then culminates into your creative expression, which is ultimately what the Miraculous Me movement is about. It's an audacious experiment of spiritual connection to you, where you completely feel free simply because you create every day.
Yes, that's so beautiful. So beautiful. Like every time that I hear you sharing about that, and like, you know, I'm doing stuff together, and I'm being able to do this because I realized some years ago, actually, through understanding my connection with myself. I've done many years of my own personal development and my spiritual practices, and during one of them, actually, I did for many years. I got introduced to that idea of wearing the colors of that, and at the very beginning, one of my teachers, she was like, "This is your colors of your chakras, of how each day, starting from the day that you were born." So I was born on a Tuesday.
Okay.
So starting on a Tuesday, she was like, "You need to wear the yellow, like, you know, like the that's your solar plexus."
Yes.
And from there, like each and every single day, then I was wearing the color that was based on the chakras. So it started from yellow, then it went to green, then it went to blue, and so on, and then to red and orange and back again. And I started to realize how wearing that color every single day was actually having an impact on me. And this was super important because, and I think that this is one of the things that at the time I wasn't doing. I wasn't as aware that I could actually listen to see, do I actually need this color today, or am I needing something else besides that color, regardless of that color's resonance with the chakra that day. My practice was telling me I needed something else.
Yeah, so how is it impacting the life?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So there's, as you're saying, like we have all of these different holistic views, and the more that I'm open, the more that I can actually listen to, actually, like, even though today I was planning on wearing that green because that relates to my heart chakra, I feel like I need to wear some blue today. And playing with that. Yes, playing
Yeah.
with that. And I think that this is so important because I luckily I was educated so that I don't care about what people think of
Mhm.
me, and I
Mhm.
can wear the clothes that I want and not feel judged.
Mhm.
Or even if people would think something, I don't care about it.
Mhm.
But as you were saying before, that's not the majority of people.
No.
I go to sometimes I go to businesses to run some workshops, and I'm wearing this, and
Mhm.
everyone good, and it's like a lot of people wouldn't do that. A lot of people would
Of course
actually
not.
get a suit and get into that
Yes.
same space. And I mean, perfectly okay. Sometimes I do dress up a little bit nicer, but
That's not
it
what you
is,
feel like.
yes, it is about that, and it's about expression. And I love when I see actually people with really like over the top, in my mind,
Mhm.
colors and
Yes.
dresses, and
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
like
Because
my
it's a creative
conditioning.
expression. It's art.
Yeah, exactly.
And for it's funny, it's you speak about how you feel and how you personally get dressed in a certain way. And everyone that we've interviewed that has followed, there's a movement called Style is on the Inside. It's a mom and daughter movement started in the States, and they've interviewed thousands of people. And when you look at them, when you look at these people, all of them have a few things in common. All of them would say to you that I dress from what I'm feeling. I don't know why. It's just how I feel. So I put these things together, and then this is what I want to be like. It doesn't follow a stereotype. It may coincidentally be a trend, but it's not about the trend. It's simply about what they feel like. And as a result, this process of what we're talking about is actually conscious style. And the idea behind conscious style is, if dressed in style, if we dressed based on our intuition, based on what we love, based on what is happening with us in our lives, then it raises a very important question. Would we actually be shopping crazily? Would we be shopping because we feel unworthy? Would we feel we must have yellow because otherwise we would be laughed at the office, or we'd be judged? Would we feel that I have to have my hair dyed so that people don't know I'm actually 46 years old and I'm aging? We would actually be acting the opposite way. We may buy beautiful things. I'm not saying we would never stop buying beautiful things, but the intention and the motivation will be that I want to buy something that's going to be a kind of like add to my cool collection of art. And I'm going to buy it with the longevity in mind, and I'm going to look at how I can always reinvent it and recreate it. So even though you're not necessarily thinking, is that polyester, or is that is that secondhand, or who made that, you're not looking at the social standard, you're not looking at the noise that our current media and our current neoliberal society is pushing and punting. You are actually operating from a space which is actually, as you and I know from practice, is consciousness, is awareness. It may not be called that, you may not call it that, but when you walk into a store and you go, oh, I really have been feeling like green, I want to buy something green, and when you buy that thing, you're going to keep it. It's going to be an addition to your toolkit with a sort of long game in mind, and you will probably want to wear it. When another thing we noticed is you probably want to care for your things. So the way you wash it, the way you iron it, the way you keep it, it becomes something important to you, because it's not just something you putting on. It's not just something disposable. It's something that is part of your expression. It's something that's part of your life.
Yes.
And what you add to this life. And I feel that if all of us dressed in style, some of the biggest systemic issues that fashion, or the concept of fast fashion, face, one is equity. And one of the biggest issues with the fashion industry is that it has punted, and the beauty industry, it has punted one narrative. We all need to look a certain way. We all need a certain shape. We all need to be wearing certain things. And that's dictated by one Eurocentric narrative, which has resulted in a majority of the world being left out, which is why fast fashion actually became a thing, because it allowed for a democratic approach in parts of the world where people could engage suddenly in these beautiful things. They may not buy it and throw it away like the Western world does, but they had an opportunity to engage in it. So, if we followed style, we would realize we would shop less. We would be more equitable because everyone is allowed to be how everyone wants to be. So there's no discrimination.
And
You almost individual artworks walking around. And my analogy for this is a beautiful flower garden. We as humans love flowers. But I don't know, Brian, if you have ever heard of anyone trying to want to change a sunflower to become a rose, because I haven't. We love sunflowers, we love roses, we love gerbers, we love all the plants for their individuality. And I always say that us human beings are like these beautiful flowers. Each of us are uniquely beautiful in our own right.
Yes.
So why on earth are we trying to shift that? Why on earth are we trying to change that? Why can't we just be embracing and see what happens? Wouldn't it be amazing to have a beautiful garden of different flowers as opposed to just one flower growing all over the world?
And as you're saying that, and I see that like not only on the issues that we have with the agriculture in terms of monocultures, but as well as you're saying, how amazing it is that each of us are actually different because we all bring something different to the table. Yet we've been conditioned to, as you're saying, go to that one narrative. Yes, very narrow way of being and trying everyone to fit into the same box where we are not. We all are different and we should celebrate that difference.
Absolutely. It's that narrative that is part of the reason we are disconnected, because we are trying. I mean, it's crazy. It's if you imagine what would it take for an oak tree to fit itself into becoming a palm tree. Like, can you imagine how, even the most amazing, Chinese bonsai masters and things are probably going to have a problem with getting an oak tree to look like a palm tree. And it's the reason that the fact that as humans and as people, we think we should be doing that is testament to the fact that we are that disconnected to spirit and to our connection to this beautiful space, which we can't live without. I mean, when we die and when we are cremated, we are exactly the same ash as a tree is, or as any other life form is. Yet we know that, and yet we still feel we still don't connect that.
Yeah, and that is, as you're saying, so important, because I feel for me, as I started to go on my own journey, I started to realize as well, not only as I was sharing before, the colors and what I want to wear, but then started to get into like, what is it that I'm wearing, and starting to get into that understanding of my connection with the earth and being with the connection of like, oh, is this good? Is it not good? And it's such a big topic. And I think, I would love actually saying this to have another conversation, because I'm just aware of our time, like on some of those other topics, because this is such a big topic. There's so many different areas that we can touch on. But I just want to get Karishma to a last few questions so that we can get a little bit of an understanding on this. My first question is, what's one resource that you would recommend others to go and see?
Okay, so there are right now there's a bunch of resources out there, and I guess one of my issues with resources and just recommending just one is that's that things are things are good for different reasons.
Mhm.
And with a lot of fake news and a lot of propaganda, one has to be really careful. And so from that vantage point, I would like to suggest one of my favorite podcasts and one of my favorite fashion journalists, who is a fashion sustainability journalist, and her name is Claire Press. Or that's her sort of social handles. And the podcast is The Wardrobe Crisis. And the reason I want to recommend this platform is because Claire interviews people from all arenas that are related to fashion, and she connects the system of fashion. So, from climate activists to regenerative farmers, to fashion designers and bloggers, and how we all connect together in this system. So she brings that very beautifully. She also does a lot of very valuable research, and you can almost go back to her sources when she quotes and when she talks about things. So in terms of a trustworthy source, I would love to recommend Claire Press on her podcast and on her website and her beautiful articles. And I think she's soon launching an online class for people. It's called the Wardrobe Crisis Academy, and it's for people who are interested in these topics, but that are not like me, who spend my whole life studying and advocating, but who want to know more and who want to know tangibly more, but in a fun and engaging way. She's launching an online class, and I think it is the other thing I really love about the work is that it's real work, it's real information, and it's free. And I think this academy, because I just heard it on her last podcast last week, was that it's going to be for the cost of a dinner. So her focus is to make real, tangible, good quality education and resources available to the mass. And I kind of really love that. I love that she works in this equitable space. So I think that would be my resource that I would love to recommend to people.
Beautiful. And Karishma, I think that we already touched on some of these things, but what is the one thing that you wish that everyone in the world knew?
That you are not your body. I would love for people to recognize that we are not, we are each here with a unique life purpose. And in that unique life purpose, we have an importance and a sense of belonging. And whilst we are unique for our unique life journey, we are not alone. We are actually part of this big connection to the universe. We are the trees, we are the leaves, we are the plants, and we are the animals. Each of those things are all interconnected to us. So for me, I wish that everybody in the world knew that any change you want to make, any kind of decision you need to make, be it big or be it small, it starts from simply listening to your voice, to yourself, because that sense of self, that deep self, not the mind, not the voice, not the noise of the arena around you, but that deep sense of self, that voice, that is actually the connection of the universe sparking you into the next things. And so if you can live from that space, trusting that you have a unique purpose, then I think half our battle for this climate crisis will be over.
So beautiful. And yes, I mean, I totally agree. And this is one of the main things with conscious action. It's that understanding on how each of us can actually create change by connecting to our true deep self, by connecting to each other, by connecting to the earth, and by having an open awareness to really listen, as you're just saying, listening to that. And I love that, as you were just saying, that noise from the arena around us, and that conditioning that we have is going deeper to that voice of, as you were calling it before, intuition, spirit, soul, however each of us relate to that, but it's that inner wisdom that we all have. I love that. I love
our,
that.
our bodies, the way we look, the way we dress, our shapes, our forms, those are our vehicles. And that is what we've come into this earth to be able to live in this playful arena. That is not who we are. That is our tool for this lifetime.
Yes, beautiful. And Karishma, how can people find you online and learn more about the things that you're doing?
Okay, so I am on all social media, so on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram at Karishma Design. And that is exactly as my name is pronounced and exactly as design is written. And then the Miraculous Me Movement is on Facebook and it's on Instagram, and it's miraculous_me_MOVT for movement. And on Facebook, it's Miraculous Me by Karishma Design. The website for Miraculous Me is miraculousme.style. And we also have a karishmadesign.com website, which will be up and running again in a few months. We just pulled it down to make some renovations. So that's actually how you can get hold of me.
Beautiful. And we will have the links all in the description of the episode. Thank you so much, Karishma, for taking the time. I think that this is such an important topic. This is a huge topic because, as you were just saying, it touches on so many different aspects of life, and we would need hundreds of episodes to actually look into that. But I think that this is the starting point. And for those that are listening, I would love to know what resonated with you, what touched you, what are you going to start doing now that you heard this? And perhaps some of this is new, perhaps you already knew some of this, but what is the conscious action that you're going to start taking? So I would love for you to share, if you're listening to this, share in the comments what resonated with you. And once again, Karishma, thank you so much for taking the time and for doing what you're doing, which is amazing work. And I love collaborating with you, and I love being part of this collective together on creating change.
Thank you. I love working with you guys as well. And I look forward to all the work we do in the future. And I love all the work we've done. And again, thank you so much for having me. Conscious actions work really resonates with me, as I've said before. So it's really wonderful to be part of a community that I can, kind of share. So thank you.
Thank you, Karishma. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Until the next episode. Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.